The Book of Adrian, Chapter 7. The Dream. Adrian, Father Gregor, and Simon sat in silence within the crumbling walls of the abandoned house that had sheltered them after their failed ambush. The air felt heavy, weighed down by the loss of the Brotherhood. Father Gregor looked at them both, trying to muster a message of hope, but his eyes, tired and shadowed, revealed that he didn't fully believe his own words. He spoke anyway. "We can't give up faith. The Brotherhood fought for something good, something beyond this death and despair." He looked to Simon and then to Adrian, as if willing himself to believe what he was saying. Adrian could sense his struggle. The priest's words felt like stones, heavy and painful to utter. After a moment, Gregor shifted, his expression softening. "I had a dream last night," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It was the ocean. The water was deep and blue, full of life. Fish and crabs thrived in the salty depths. There was peace there, beauty." His voice grew hoarse and he looked away, as if the memory of the dream itself was too painful. It was a dream of a world untouched by the creeping death. Adrian was struck by the image. He'd heard tales of the ocean from his father, of its vastness and beauty, but he had never seen it himself. "Do you think the dream was a sign?" Adrian asked. "Could the ocean have escaped the creeping death?" Gregor sat in silence, one arm resting on his knees, the other tracing patterns in the dirt on the floor with a stick. The question lingered in the air like a fragile hope. "Father?" Adrian repeated softly. Gregor shrugged, not meeting Adrian's gaze. "I don't know, my son. It could be a sign. Or maybe just a dream." He paused, the weight of the moment bearing down on him. "But perhaps that's where we should go." Adrian's stomach growled, and the thought of staying in Rennes even a moment longer made him restless. He rose to his feet. "Let's head to the coast. I want to see it. To see if it's as beautiful as the stories say." Simon, who hadn't spoken a word, stood beside Adrian and nodded in agreement. Father Gregor, seeing their resolve, sighed and nodded. "Yes. But we'll leave after dark. The bishop's men will be scouring the city by day for any of us who escaped." That afternoon, the bishop held what was left of the Brotherhood in the city centre. In coffin-shaped cages, their naked bodies were lowered from high platforms into the swirling tendrils of the creeping death, never to rise again. Rennes was in the hands of a madman. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Adrian, Gregor, and Simon readied themselves. They had a few days' worth of rations, enough to keep them moving, but not enough to last. Before they set out, Father Gregor offered a prayer over them, his voice trembling as he asked for protection on their journey. After sunset, they quietly descended from the second story of the abandoned house, moving through the narrow, winding streets, staying close to the shadows. They walked in silence, the sounds of their breathing apparatuses the only noise to fill the otherwise empty night. Once they had cleared the city's edge and left behind any trace of Rennes, they paused to chart their course toward the coast. "Southwest," Father Gregor said, his voice firm. "That will take us to the shore, the closest path there." But before they could start, Simon, silent as ever, stepped forward and pointed south, almost southeast. Adrian and Gregor exchanged glances, taken aback by his assertiveness. Without speaking, Simon continued walking in that direction, glancing back to make sure they followed. "Do you know this path, Simon?" Adrian asked, his curiosity piqued. Simon turned, gave a nod, and continued walking, his posture tense and his gaze fixed forward. He clearly knew the area but wasn't offering much explanation. They followed him, trusting that he had a reason, though unease crept into Adrian's mind. Was there a destination Simon hadn't shared? Hours passed as they moved through barren fields and the remains of farmhouses, their shadows stretching under the thin moonlight. As they neared a copse of gnarled, blackened trees, Simon stopped again, his body tensing. Adrian's breath hitched as he, too, sensed something nearby. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. There, emerging from the dense shadows between the trees, was a figure. Draped in tattered, filthy robes, it staggered forward, one arm clutching its side. The man's skin was pale and blotched, his hair matted, and his eyes stared out vacantly, unseeing, but somehow aware. A foul odor, sharp and metallic, drifted toward them. Father Gregor took a step back, and Adrian tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword, watching the stranger's erratic movements. The man moved closer, muttering to himself in a hoarse, cracked voice. "Betrayed, all betrayed. Worms in the earth, crawling, crawling," he rasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Nothing left, only death, only the rot, everyone taken, except me." He stopped a few paces away, his wild gaze flitting over them, but not truly seeing them. His lips twisted into a grimace as he muttered, "They told me they'd be safe. Safe in the dark. But they lie. Oh, how they lie." Father Gregor cleared his throat, his voice steady but cautious. "Do you need help, my friend?" The man let out a bitter laugh, the sound twisting into a growl. "Help?" he sneered. "There's no help, no escape. They let you think you're safe, but then the darkness finds you." Adrian felt a shiver run down his spine. The man's words made no sense, but there was a madness in his eyes that sent a wave of dread over him. The man lurched toward them, his hands clawing the air. "You're fools! Fools to think you can escape it! It's everywhere, everywhere!" His voice rose into a shriek, and then he doubled over, clutching his stomach, his face contorted in agony. Simon took a step back, signaling for them to leave, but the man's gaze snapped up, wild and unhinged. "You can't leave," he rasped, stumbling forward. "It won't let you go." Father Gregor held out a hand, gently but firmly. "We mean you no harm." The man only laughed, a high, broken sound. Then, in a movement so sudden it was almost a blur, he lunged at Father Gregor, his hands clawing desperately. Adrian reacted instinctively, stepping between them and pushing the crazed man back. The man staggered, but instead of retaliating, he let out a strangled, broken sob. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his head, muttering unintelligibly. For a moment, they stood frozen, watching him rock back and forth, his words dissolving into incoherent ramblings. Finally, Simon gestured sharply, urging them to keep moving. They backed away, leaving the man behind, his figure quickly swallowed by the shadows as they retreated into the night. They walked in silence, shaken by the encounter. Father Gregor's face was pale, and Adrian could still feel the weight of the man's touch on his arm. After what felt like hours, Simon led them over a low rise, and as they reached the top, Adrian saw it, a vast, winding river cutting through the landscape, its waters dark and smooth under the moonlight. "The Loire," Father Gregor breathed, his voice filled with awe. "Simon, you led us here." Simon's expression was unreadable, but Adrian saw a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Father Gregor exhaled, a note of hope returning to his voice. "Perhaps the river will carry us where we need to go." Adrian glanced at Simon, feeling a newfound respect for the silent boy. He had known all along, guiding them toward this path. Adrian didn't know where the river would take them, but for the first time since the ambush, he felt a glimmer of possibility.